Here's your shot at winning $1,000. Text the national keyword change right now to 95819. That's CHANG to 95819. We'll text you back to confirm your entry. Data and messaging rates may apply. Please don't text and drive. It's $5K a day on WMAL. Now on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
7:07 on O'Connor and Company on this busy Wednesday morning. It'll be very interesting to see how the media and how the politicians in town start navigating through what is a 7-hour-old government shutdown, such as it is, and how the Trump administration flexes their constitutional muscle, because the Congress, the Democrats in particular, have just handed a whole lot of power over to Donald Trump and Russ Vought, the director of OMB. Let's see how they use it. Coming up in 30 minutes, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer on yesterday's speech from Hegseth and Trump to our generals and admirals. 8:05, Leland Vittert will join us. He's got a brand new book about being an adult on the autism spectrum with an incredibly impressive job and impressive performance. What did his dad do to help him achieve what he's achieved? It's a great story. 8:35, Susan Ferriccio, Washington Times, on the government shutdown. And Julie Gunlock, of course, veteran of many government shutdowns, is with us all morning. Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
Let's turn our sights to Maryland for a moment. Fox 45 in Baltimore. Chris Papst does some great investigative reporting for for that station. Your unit is called Project Baltimore, is that right, Chris? Chris?
Yes.
Oh, we got you. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So we've been watching your, by the way, I want to point out, Chris has a great book. It's called Failure Factory, How Baltimore City Public Schools Deprive Taxpayers and Students of a Future. And it is one of the greatest scandals of the state of Maryland that the children in Baltimore are just sort of written off, never given an opportunity after decades of failure. But this latest scandal that you found having to do with students who were just unaccounted for, how does this happen exactly? And maybe start at the beginning and describe exactly what we're talking about here.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on. So the purpose of Failure Factory, I've been investigating Baltimore City schools for Fox 45 News. I'm on a team called Project Baltimore. And the purpose of Failure Factory was because I've been investigating the school systems for 8 years. And what I've learned is that there is so much money now that is involved in public education that public education has become in many ways more about acquiring the money than it is about actually educating the students. There's more of an emphasis on funding than kids. And that leads into what we just broke, which is a story about students who cannot be found. So the way that Maryland operates is that schools get money based on the number of students that are enrolled. But it's only on one day a year, and a lot of people don't realize this. Enrollment in Maryland public schools is only taken one day a year, and that's September 30th. The number of students that you have enrolled on that one day determines all of your funding. So what we have seen is that over the past 5 or 6 years, there's been a growing number of students who are enrolled on that September 30th day, but then later on during the school year, they go missing. They can't find them, and they're called whereabouts unknown. That is what the designation is through the state. So what we have found was that just in 2024, just in 1 year, Maryland taxpayers paid $168 million to schools. They gave the money to schools to educate kids who cannot be found. So in Failure Factory, in my book, I go back over years and I talk about why this is happening. And it's happening because the schools want the money. And this is a very simple problem to fix. Instead of counting enrollment on one day of year, you count it maybe 2 days a year, once in September, once in February. There have been bills that have been introduced in Annapolis to count enrollment 4 times a year to get a more accurate enrollment count, so the money is actually going to educate the students and not going to an empty seat where the schools just keep the money. But there's no appetite in Maryland to pass a bill like that, because what it would do and we know this, is that it would reduce a school's funding because their enrollment would go down. And that's not what schools want. They don't want less money. They want more money.
Well, the other thing is you're talking about millions and millions of dollars going into these school districts for students that are not or not showing up. But then you look at the state of the schools. I mean, kids are not being educated in Baltimore schools. I have another question though about enrollment. It, I feel like sometimes I look at things and I'm too old. I think back to the 70s, how things were done, right? How does enrollment work? Is this an automatic enrollment? Does a parent have to show up to the school to enroll their kids? How exactly does this work? Because why is it so easy that these kids disappear or really never show up?
Because there's no incentive to keep the kid in the school. Once you hit on September 30th, and once you have that enrollment for that kid, if that kid does not show up again the rest of the year, that school gets the money. And in Maryland, it's about between $20,000 and $21,000 per student is, how much money the schools get. So for every student that these schools can enroll, they get between $20,000 and $21,000. And all the kid has to do is show up one day prior to September 30th. If that kid shows up anywhere between September 1st and September 30th, they count them for enrollment on that one day, September 30th, and then the schools get the money. And you mentioned about the lack of education the kids are getting. So last year in Baltimore City schools, that school system had a $1.7 billion budget. 10% of the kids were proficient in math. 10%. So 90% of the students in a school are not proficient in math with a $1.7 billion budget. How is that possible?
Right.
It's possible because the schools are focused on getting the money and not educating the students.
And by the way, that 21,000 or so dollar amount that Maryland claims they spend per student, since a significant percentage is only showing up for that one day and then they're never seen of or heard of again, the actual dollar amount per pupil attending class is much higher, which basically highlights how futile their efforts are, how incompetent they are at educating these children, because they actually have a lot more money to work with on a per kid basis if in fact you reduce the challenge of educating a child just to the dollar amount. If anything, it exposes that it's really not about the money. It appears it's about how you educate kids, the approach you take to educate the kids.
Well, that's why I wrote Failure Factory, because you look at what is happening, and it to your point, if you're a principal, okay, and principals in Baltimore City make a lot of money. They make around $160,000, $170,000 a year, and there are schools that I highlight in the book that do not have a single student proficient in anything, math or English, and that principal's making $160,000 a year. On the flip side of that, you have schools that are very successful, and those principals are also making the same amount of money. There isn't an incentive built into our education system for success. It's just not there. The incentive is to get the money, because once you get the money, it doesn't matter if your kid graduates or doesn't graduate, if your students are proficient or not. You have the money, you keep the money, and you spend the money.
Amazing. Chris Papst from Fox 45. Real fast, one quick question here. It seems to me these kids enroll on September 30th, that magic day. The funding goes, and the school makes all of the money, or the district makes the money from the state and from the feds. At that point, these kids, as you said, their whereabouts unknown. Is that what they're referred to as?
Yes, correct.
So it seems to me either this is just rampant fraud and those kids didn't really exist, or they were just, purposely brought in to run the numbers up and then, go off on their merry way. Or we might have children who are in danger here, who are unsafe because they've slipped through the cracks. I mean, has there been any response from the Maryland state educators here who are responsible for this to say, yeah, we're trying to get to the bottom of this. We worry about these children. They could be, human trafficked. They may get caught up in drugs. They may be, victims of crime. I mean, is there any concern here, or are they just cashing the checks?
Yesterday, I did speak with the Maryland State Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Carrie Wright, and the State Board of Education President, Dr. Joshua Michael. And they both express grave concern over this for the purposes of what you just said. We don't know where these students are. They're missing. But yet the schools are getting a lot of money, $168 million, to educate students who aren't there. Now, those two, the two leaders of the school system, of the state school system, they're very concerned about this. And clearly they should be. They can't go on camera and say they're not concerned. But
Right.
what you need is that you need the principals of the schools. You need the assistant principals of the schools to go out there, find these kids. Where are they? Are they in danger? Why aren't they in school? Why aren't they getting an education? And that goes back to what we just spoke about. Those principals are going to make the same amount of money every 2 weeks, and they're going to know exactly what their pay raises are for the next 10 or 15 years because of the union, and there just simply isn't the incentive. I'm not saying the principals don't care, but we're humans. We're incentivized by everything that we do. If we're hungry, we go eat. We have an incentive, and we have to go figure out, how to fulfill that. And in this particular situation, the way the public education systems are set up, there's just simply no incentive, and that's the whole point of failure factor. And I really appreciate you guys bringing that up, because I think that people need to know what is going on in our public school system.
Yeah, and by the way, it's something that Wes Moore is running for re-election on, proudly proclaiming that he's been this great education governor, and this is an absolute nightmare and a scandal at the highest level.
Can I say one thing about that? We got 10 more seconds. So whenever you look at a politician like Governor Moore, what do they always say? They always say, we have funded more for education than any previous administration. This budget puts more money into education than any other budget. They never talk about the success. They only talk about the money, because there isn't success. There isn't success. It's just about money and getting money to those schools.
Chris Papst, great work. Keep up the great work, and let us know next development you have on this or any other stuff you're working on here. We're down in D.C. I know we're not Baltimore, but huge Maryland audience, and we care deeply about this. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
It's 7:19.